I don't want to be around any of you. You all are horrible people. I'm disappearing from the face of the earth, which I can see how someone gets there. Hello, hi everyone. Welcome to my YouTube channel. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Ebony and I'm here to do a catch-up video. I'm going to be discussing the books that I've read over the past 2 months in August and September. But before we get into it, a lot of exciting things have happened since my last upload. This channel has reached 5,000 subscribers, which is honestly so cool and amazing, and I can't think about it too much because 5,000 people are subscribed and show me such kindness and support on my channel, so thank you so much. Personally, work has really kicked up in September. I've just been adjusting and getting into a new routine, so we'll get into how my reading month reflects the chaotic month I've had in September. But first off, I'm going to start off with the books that I read in August. And the first book that I read in August was Weather by Jenny Offill. Weather follows a middle-aged woman as she is basically having a midlife crisis and she is coming to terms with where she's at currently in her life. She feels as though she hasn't necessarily reached the heights of success that she would have hoped to. She was in a PhD program and she ended up dropping out, and now she works in the library for her former PhD mentor who runs a doomsday podcast, and she has recently started answering the questions that the podcast receives. So it zooms into her own personal inner turmoil of versing the void and trying to make sense of her life through her relationship to her husband, like through her identities as being a wife, mother, sister. And then it zooms out and focuses on where society and the world is headed. There's impending climate crisis dialogue in there, as well as the future of technology and what it means for human relationships. Jenny Offill uses fragmentary style writing to piece together the narrative and the inner thoughts of our main character, Lizzie. She does a good job of interweaving comedy and humor to alleviate the sense of existential dread. This is a recurring theme on my channel. I love reading fragmentary, very inner monologue, thinky, pondering books because that's how I feel. I feel like I see myself a lot in these books. Assembly is another one I'm thinking of off the top of my head. But yes, so that was Weather by Jenny Offill. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I've read 2 Jenny Offill books this year, and let me just say they've both been very fun reads. Up next, I read Pure Color by Sheila, Heti. And let me just say, this book was one of my most anticipated reads of the year. It's a new release, but I was sorely disappointed in Pure Color. I know, I'm so sad about it because I was so excited. Pure Color follows a young woman basically detailing her relationship to her father and ultimately how she grapples with the grief of losing her father. It is told in a way that really pulled me in. It's very transcendental, runs along the same course as Weather in terms of themes and philosophical ponderings, but I feel as though it fell flat because it was a little too out there for me. I tend to like things that are a little more grounded in reality, and in Pure Color, a main character literally dresses up as a leaf to deal with her father's grief, which there's nothing wrong with, but I don't know. I feel like the delivery of the story just didn't really resonate with me as well. As I was saying, it follows our main character and her relationship to her father, her love for her father, and how that transcends death, essentially. It was getting a little too Freudian for me, I will say. Like, Sigmund Freud would read this book and I think he would agree. You know what I'm saying? He would agree. I'm pretty sure at one point the main character says that she wishes she could have married her father, and I was like, where are we going with this? I don't know. It was just losing me in those instances. But otherwise, I'm open to reading more Sheila Heti. We'll see what happens, but I'm not like running to my local bookstore or to Libby or to my library to check out a book by her. And then next, I started reading for Women in Translation Month, which was so much fun. One of my reading goals this year was to read more translated fiction, and that's what I did. The first book that I read was Breasts and Eggs by Mieko Kawakami, and it is essentially two stories. The first story deals with the breast aspect of the title, and we follow our main character, Natsuko, as she is a writer living in a neighborhood in Japan, and her sister and niece visit her very crammed small apartment, and it is reflecting on their childhood, their upbringing. It's so interesting to see the dynamics between Natsuko and her sister and her niece, and then mother and daughter relationships. It really goes into how generational trauma and disadvantages really play out. Natsuko's sister comes to visit her because she is interested in receiving plastic surgery. So it goes into how Western beauty standards also impact our characters. And yeah, it was really, really interesting. The first novella was beautiful. Kawakami's writing, beyond poetic, one of my new favorite writers. Just the way that Kawakami captures longing through the human body and then also through her scenery, and translates what her characters are experiencing from what they're observing. There's this one scene where Natsuko is riding the Ferris wheel with her niece, and she talks about her past and upbringing and growing up with her sister. The way that she captures like a blue summer, perfect. I loved it. And then the second half of the book, or the bulk of the book, deals with the eggs section, which is Natsuko's path to motherhood in a very unconventional way for Japanese society and the obstacles she faces with that. So overall, it was super interesting. I really loved, as I was saying, how Kawakami captures the human body as well as feeling distanced and disconnected from people that we speak to often, because you don't really know how to express yourself or what you're feeling, or you feel very isolated in what you're feeling. Loved it. Breasts and Eggs, one of my new favorite books that I've read this year. Absolutely amazing, and it was translated from Japanese. I forgot to mention that before I read Breasts and Eggs, I finished reading the selected poems of Gwendolyn Brooks, which I also mentioned in the reading vlog. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It really captures the Black experience in America, and there's mythology interweaved throughout. It was a very different poetry collection from what I typically gravitate towards and read, but I found a lot of value in it. Obviously, it's Gwendolyn Brooks, amazing poet and writer. And yeah, I don't really have too much to say about it. One of my new favorite poems that I read recently is in there, and yeah, I enjoyed it. So going back to Women in Translation Month, the next book that I read was The White Book by Kang, and this is translated from Korean. And The White Book follows a woman writer in residency in Warsaw, I believe. And she is reimagining the life of her older sister, who only lived for 24 to 48 hours. The way that she does that is she muses on and connects that experience and that reimagining with the color white. So she discusses, for instance, the color of swaddling cloths as being white and breast milk as white, in order to talk about her sister being a baby. And then for the older years, she brings in like a white flower or just a lot of white imagery. It's very cold, very bleak, very depressing, this book, but it is such a short read and it's very, very interesting. I love reading books where the author decides to use this way of storytelling. It's no secret, if you watch my channel, that Bluets by Maggie Nelson is one of my favorite books, and Maggie Nelson does something very similarly with Bluets, as Kang does with the White Book, and I enjoyed it. I did think it was very, very sad, as I was saying, because the main character is mourning the death of her sister and also ponders if she would have even been in existence had her sister been born. So yeah, it's very heavy topic, and there's also mentionings of the effects of like World War II on the town that she's living in. So it's a very, very heavy read, but I have been meaning to read the White Book literally forever, and I was able to get to it this month, which was so exciting. And after the White Book, I read Dogs of Summer by Andrea Abreu, and this is set in the Canary Islands. It follows two female friends and their toxic relationship. Our narrator, she's dedicated to her best friend Zora, like willing to compromise herself and her beliefs and her comfort in order to please Zora and to remain her friend. And I feel like this book was so relatable in that sense. I definitely could relate. It's set in the summer of 2005, so it also felt very nostalgic for me because that's when I was growing up as a young girl as well. I believe they're 12 in this book, and it follows their summer on the island. It's hot, it's sticky, it's gross. The amount of times that poop and bodily functions were mentioned in this book typically would have made me like not want to read it in the way that Moshfegh, I feel like, overdoes it sometimes. But I actually thoroughly enjoyed it, and it's funny that, or not funny, it's quite sad that our narrator degrades herself so much because Azora calls her as a nickname shit, and we don't even know our narrator's name. We only know her nickname, in which Azora gives her. There is like that whole awakening of your identity and your female friendships and growing up online and what that means, and growing up in a town that is impoverished and trying to reach it to the beach on a very hot, annoyingly sticky summer day with mosquitoes flying around you. And yeah, I thought the writing was very lyrical and poetic, and it reads very fast. There is a pace throughout the novel that makes you want to keep reading it. But I will say it wasn't my favorite, not for any particular reason. I just wasn't as inclined to pick it up, if that makes sense. When I read it, I was enjoying the story, but if I wasn't reading it, I wasn't necessarily thinking about it outside of that. This book is blurbed to be a mix or an intersection between My Brilliant Friend, which we'll talk about in a second, and another queer story called, yes, A Huge Content Warning for Eating Disorders. If you're not really into cursing and the gross bodily functions and mentions of excrement and stuff like that in books, this might not be for you. But like I said, as someone who typically does not enjoy that as much in the literature I read, I didn't think it took me out of the story too much. I thought that it fit the atmosphere and what Andrea Abreu was conveying perfectly, and the relationship between the two girls perfectly. So that's Dogs of Summer. And then I read My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante. Female friendship, once again, toxic female friendship, if you will. It's been like the new buzzword on social media, but I think it's way more nuanced than that. So we follow our two girls, our two besties, Elena, who goes by Lanu, and Lena, who goes by Lila. But it's set in Naples. It is a part of the Neapolitan Quartet series by Ferrante, and the first book follows them growing up impoverished once again, the effects of being poor and trying to have access to an education that feels like a luxury. But they're both very brilliant, bright girls, and there's this mutual competition between them. And I feel as though Ferrante really captures that element of loving your best friend, but then also secretly being in competition with them and comparing yourself to them and feeling as though you will never equate to their abilities and their beauty. And yeah, it's just such a great story. There's family drama. The neighborhood I thought would be very overwhelming because I'm not one who typically likes to read books with a lot of characters being mentioned, but I thought that everything was done beautifully. I was not once overwhelmed by the amount of characters listed, and I loved hearing about the neighborhood drama, the family drama. Honestly, Leela, love her. And the story begins, actually, this is very important. The story begins with Lanu writing about how Leela has decided to disappear, wipe herself from Naples, from the neighborhood, and go off, and no one knows where she is. And the story opens up from that point, and Elena is recounting how Leela got to the point in which she is. So that's how the novel starts. From there, I was into it, and we're just following the two girls and their relationship, and ultimately what leads Leela to this breaking point of being like, I don't want to be around any of you. You all are horrible people. I'm disappearing from the face of the earth, which I can see how someone gets there. And up next, I read Bless the Daughter Raised by a Voice in Her Head by Warsan, Shire. This is a collection of poems, and Warsan Shire is very, very critically acclaimed poet. This details the experience of a Somali British young woman who's living in a land that is not her home. It details the effects of war and, once again, generational trauma and the act of needing to flee your home and assimilate into a society that's different than yours and that you are often ostracized by. And there were so many stunning poems in here. I found the language to be very accessible, so if you're wanting to get into reading poetry, definitely check this out. It was not overwhelming at all in my opinion in terms of the language. Those were all of my August reads. Next, I'm gonna get into September, which honestly, September, I finished 3 books this past month. And you know what? It's fine. Read at your own pace. There's no competition. I often find that as someone who posts book content, if I don't read as much in a month, it really puts me behind. But it's just realistically what I could get to, and there's nothing wrong with that. So if you only read 1 book, or if you didn't read any book at all this month, don't feel bad. You know, don't feel bad about it at all. There's no pressure. We're reading for pleasure here. Okay, so anyway, I read Recitatif by Toni Morrison. This is my second Toni Morrison. I'm pretty sure I'm going to try to read a book from her every month. I feel like that's very doable. So I read Recitatif. The introduction by Zadie Smith is one of my favorite pieces of literary analysis that I've read this year. Zadie Smith does a stunning job of fleshing out the story, but this is just something that I wish I would have done. I suggest that you read Recitatif, the story first, and then read the introduction by Zadie Smith, because she ruined the whole plot and point of the book for me, but it was so fascinating. So I would have liked to see my experience going into the book without having read that first. I think I would have experienced it slightly differently. But anyway, the main story, or the main point of Recitatif, is that it is Toni Morrison's kind of experiment, in my opinion. So we follow 2 girls and their friendship, reoccurring theme right now. And basically the 2 girls have family. They have their mothers, but they are institutionalized in a home for children who are orphaned. So they know they're not staying there that long. Their mothers just couldn't take care of them within that time. But here is the thing that makes the story so interesting. One of the girls is white and one of the girls is black, but Toni Morrison never explicitly states which girl is what race. So as the reader, you are trying to decode or piece together or formulate your own opinion on which one is the girl who is black and which one is the girl who is white. But in order to do that, you need to check your own biases, and Toni Morrison really leans into stereotypes, which as a reader you need to reflect on and kind of say, okay, why do I attribute this quality to this race? You know, it was very, very interesting. I think everyone should read this book. As I said, it did a good job of exposing my own preconceptions of the qualities that specific races have. So I enjoyed it. As I said, I would have liked to read the story first, and then I would have been insanely mind blown by Zadie Smith's introduction. But great writing on both of them. Absolutely love. And then going back to the Neapolitan Quartet, I read The Story of a New Name, which is the second novel. I finished it towards the end of September. This one we follow, so spoiler alert if you haven't read My Brilliant Friend yet, I'm going to talk a little bit about the plot. But this follows, once again, Lanu and Leela's friendship. But it's interesting because in this book they don't really interact as much. They are now young adults, I want to say. They're 18 all the way up into their early 20s, and Lanu is trying to continue pursuing her education. Leela is very much so caught up in her marriage to Stefano and in the neighborhood and being a mother. So we see how their dynamic has changed. This story starts off with Leela leaving Lanu, I believe, with a box of her writings. As I was saying, Lanu has always appreciated Leela, and she feels as though her own life is so integrated and her own qualities are so integrated with Leela that she cannot separate the two of them from each other. And she decides to read these writings detailing what happened when Elena and Lanu were not together. Well, Lanu and Leela were not together. So she's recounting the story, as I was saying, of how Leela gets to the point where she disappears from everyone. I really liked it, but as I was saying, I don't know if I was just in a reading slump, but I wasn't as inclined to pick this up, and I'm actually taking a little break from the Neapolitan Quartet. I don't typically read series, so I think I just need a break, and I have, like, my brain is ready to be immersed in a different world right now. So I'll get to the third and fourth book eventually. I will say Elena Ferrante knows how to write a cliffhanger, and I also just want to debunk the rumors that Elena Ferrante is a man. There is no man who is writing female friendships and the female experience to a T the way that Elena Ferrante is. That's that. Lastly, I read Their Eyes Were Watching God. This was a buddy read with Juliet on TikTok, who's from TikTok, a bookish creator from TikTok, and it was so nice buddy reading this with her. But Their Eyes Were Watching God follows our main character, Janie Crawford, as she is ultimately confined and restricted to this society in which she's brought up in. It's 1920s, and we follow her through 3 different marriages to 3 really crappy men. Like, her voice gets stifled. There's content warnings for domestic abuse and violence. Ultimately, this story, I think, captured the want and desire for a woman to search for the most perfect and true love, but it being thwarted every time, or it not necessarily being realistic or reality, which is a heartbreaking story. Like, that sucks. The way that it's written is very, very interesting. Zora Hurston writes the story almost completely in Southern slang and dialogue, so it really captures, I feel, the essence of, like, the Black community at that time. But I will say it took me a while to get into, and I really had to put forth the effort to make sure that I was understanding what was going on, because it's not, you know, it's not written like formal prose, you know, which is not a bad thing. It's just different. And I really appreciated that stylistic choice, because I feel like it just cements Janie in that period of time. That concludes my reading wrap up. Sorry, this video is probably super long, and probably one of the longer videos I'm going to post on my channel, but I just thought that I would do a nice little update on where I'm at reading wise. Thoroughly appreciate each and every one of you for watching. If you made it to the end of the video, let me know what your favorite reads or read has been recently, or if you haven't been reading as much, let me know what else you've been dabbling into, what other hobbies you've been feeling lately. And happy spooky season. I'm wearing black and I cannot wait to eat a nice warm soup after this because I'm literally freezing. I'll catch you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a beautiful day wherever you are. Bye.